A highway may seem lonely, but hiding in plain sight is a nightmare so intense, it crawls beneath your skin. Directed by Robert Harmon, The Hitcher is a landmark for 1986 horror thrillers for its straight, unrelenting, pure stripped-down intensity. It's driven by cat and mouse frenzy that's fueled by an intense villain that carries himself as if he has ice in his veins. It's an 80s execution of suspense, which is why it's one of the leading horror thriller films of the decade. Before the vast majority of society had their faces locked to a phone screen, complaining that all of the episodes of their favorite show got taken off of their favorite streaming app, the 80s gave us a lot of incredible action-packed movies full of fantastic stunts, evil bad guy entities, and practical effects. No green screens whatsoever, no CGI, and in my opinion, more daring ideas. Studios were constantly churning out unrelenting thrillers with grittier atmospheres. Imagine calling your friend from a payphone to see if they want to go check out The Terminator later. That is less of a question, but more so a summoning for mid-40-year-olds in Death Wish 2 t-shirts. The rising appetite for these films created a golden era of higher concept thrillers such as Class of 1984, To Live and Die in LA, and Near Dark. We can trace this to society's obsession with rural American peril. This is often referenced as the stranger danger panic of the 80s. In the digital age, we don't have to imagine having a limited connection to the world. However, in the 80s, the concept of disappearing was heightened, as you were essentially uncontactable if you weren't at home or work. Being in serious and immediate trouble kickstarted a lot of media-driven hysteria, causing fear in people's security, and studios at the time took full advantage of this. Studios pushed for more visceral films that emphasized survival, answering the hypothetical, "what would you do?" in an atmosphere of realistic danger that audiences playfully posed to one another. This changed how we view thriller films, turning them into cultural phenomenons, as they are essentially a reflection of society's fears. The Hitcher is the epitome of this era with its low-budget, tailor-made actors, and relentless thrilling action. Our story begins with a young transporter named Jim Halsey, who's traveling across the country in the middle of a rainy night to make a vehicle delivery. Jim drives across a nearby drifter who he picks up on the highway. The drifter in question is named John Ryder, a disturbed man who makes Jim quickly feel that something isn't right. Things escalate as Ryder toys menacingly with Jim by pulling out a knife, immediately transitioning the road trip-like job that he's on to fending for his life. Jim manages to escape by kicking John out of the door, but his trip isn't over yet. An early celebration turns into a game of pursuit that quickly becomes an emotional and physical endurance test. What kicks off is a really scary plot that feels like a trap. The remainder of our movie begins our cat and mouse adventure as Jim spots the drifter in the back of a family's vehicle, causing him to crash as he desperately tries to warn the family to pull over. Later, Jim finds the abandoned vehicle as it soaks his shoes in blood. Then, nearby, encountering John once again in an abandoned auto shop. This is the first sign where we realize this man might not be going anywhere anytime soon. Instead of attacking him, he throws him his keys and escapes with the trucker. Things continue to escalate throughout the film. John literally attempts to run down Jim with said truck, causing it to crash into gas pumps. Jim luckily scurries away. However, John then blows up the gas station, absolutely unhinged, somehow surviving the chaos. Jim makes his way to a roadside diner where he attempts to call the police and meets a happy-go-lucky waitress named Nash. She fixes him some food, and he eventually spots a finger in his fries, which indicates John is within the vicinity. The cops eventually show up and we find out Ryder has framed Jim for the recent murders. He's then arrested and locked up overnight. That morning, he awakes to the cops being completely massacred. Now, I wonder who could have done that. Jim flees, spotting two nearby cops at a gas station, to which he takes hostage, forcing them to drive. Now, he's seen pleading with one of the captains on speaker, and as soon as he's about to surrender, John pulls alongside him, killing both of the officers in cold blood. This guy never stops. John makes his escape and Jim almost crashes the vehicle he's currently occupying. Then, Jim shows up to another cafe, whom Ryder also spots as per usual. John points out that Jim has an empty revolver, calling his bluff as the gun is pointed directly at him. Before John disappears again, he leaves Jim bullets stating, "You'll figure it out." Soon, we get another interaction with the police after Jim finds Nash on a bus, who quickly bails him out of being shot after explaining his situation. They attempt to escape in a police vehicle after being chased by more cops. This is now starting to feel like a Grand Theft Auto mission. Things escalate even further as Ryder shows up to join in on the fun, killing the officers, causing a massive car pileup, and even blows up a helicopter during this interaction. As we reach towards the end of the movie, our protagonist and Nash head towards a hotel, in which John shows up and abducts her while Jim is in the shower. In a face-off outside, the cops corner John, who finally seem to realize that Jim is innocent, as they find Nash tied between the truck and a trailer hitch. John is threatening to tear her apart by letting go of the brake, so Jim is enlisted by the police to negotiate with him. John wants Jim to blow his head clean off with a gun. Reluctant to do so, Jim becomes a catalyst for Nash's death as she dies at the hands, feet of John. This extreme measure allows the police to finally subdue our villain. While in containment, being transported to what I can only assume is a maximum security facility, we almost begin to believe that the danger is over. Well, not exactly. Jim decides to hold another cop captive as he steals a vehicle yet again to chase down Ryder's prison bus. Jim was right in doing so as Ryder kills both of the cops, quickly bursting out of the vehicle in a literal bloody roar. Jim plows through Ryder in one last attempt at redemption, gunning him down after he tries to pick up his own bloody carcass. The Hitcher is high-action 80s passion as it captures many strong elements, but what I think really sold audiences is its simplicity. When I viewed this movie for the first time, I was immediately captivated by this strong opening with Rutger Hauer and C. Thomas Howell. Hearing John speak so calmly, yet with such psychological warfare, really caught my attention and made me anticipate what was going to happen next. The idea of picking up a stranger is such a clear-cut story, an entire Netflix series could be made about it today. Think about it. The open road typically signifies freedom, memories, and opportunities. However, the notion that any stranger could embody evil sells itself. And within minutes, absolutely no time is wasted as fears become reality. And that's how The Hitcher flips a traditional feel-good road trip movie, transforming open roads into narrow nightmares. The freedom of escape when Jim found a way to California now feels a lot more claustrophobic. That's due to John Ryder's mystique being ever-present and unstoppable. He's around every corner at all the right times, Even simple spaces that are supposed to feel safe, like gas stations and rest stops, are invaded by John. This all circles back to the origin of fear and takes it to that next step. It creates a myth, though, that this cat and mouse chase has no conceptual rules. It strips the idea that Jim has a glimpse of hope. He never feels safe or has a clever escape. The 80s were full of memorable villains, but none that can cause quite as nail-biting chills as John Ryder. He has a cold demeanor, almost satanic-like. However, he's also very polite, soft-spoken, and charismatic, making him even more menacing and believable, as this gives the notion that anybody can be harmful. This was quite uncommon in comparison to the more maniacal bad guys of the time, like Chop Top or Freddy.
Music is my life!
With his carefully crafted mind games, John is a chaotic force to be reckoned with. Similar to characters from titles like Henry Portraits of a Serial Killer, John has no backstory, so audiences are left without any rationalization to what his motives are. Closure is important, as humankind cannot comprehend the unknown. We seek order and predictability as a survival coping mechanism. Fear is often exasperated by the uncertainty, so our minds can't comprehend what's happening without meaning. It also amplifies the fact that evil can embody anybody at any given time. John sees life as a game and loves to test people's livelihoods. Not only is he chasing Jim, but setting him up for the murders. This extra layer of terror shifts the narrative from not only physical, but psychological. The open road already feels invasive, and John literally strips Jim of any and all protection. The more resilient Jim is, the more fun John has putting him through these mental and physical gymnastics. Since Ryder has no motive for us to come back to, he is essentially a mechanism for Jim's emotional desperation. This allows us to focus more on Jim's story arc as a whole, signifying that a sinister driving force can change one person's life in an instant. John lies, cheats, and reappears whenever he wants to get the upper hand. Essentially, he doesn't care if he lives or dies. And this goes a long way for the film because it can seem like violence is inevitable, as opposed to exploitable. That brings me to my next point. This movie stands on its own and doesn't actually have a lot of gore. I typically am uninterested in films that have death off camera, but this film does it right. Many of the kills are suggested or happen off screen, and this keeps the tone serious. For example, this film was infamous for the scene where Nash gets her body torn in half, but you don't actually see any of this, and it didn't matter at the time because visually striking kills weren't necessary when Rutger has established himself as an entity on screen. This entity once again reinforces the idea that John doesn't really care if he gets caught in the end, as he's not concerned for his own well-being and continues pushing Jim to his absolute limits. As for Jim, he also lacks much of a backstory outside of working for a car delivery service heading to California. His ambitions are not clearly mentioned from the beginning either. However, in the end, after all the trials and tribulations that John put him through, he no longer cares about life or death as well. It's as if Jim's intention for one final face-off gives him some sort of dark admiration for John, proving him right that when humans withstand enough violence, they can inhabit a bit of psychological inheritance to it, which is John's truest motive all along. When he's finally murdered by Jim, it's not death that he was seeking, it's that he wanted Jim to absorb what John has always represented, internalize his worldview, and continue the cycle of violence. The Hitcher was not a huge release at the time. It didn't quite catch on, and it was received negatively by critics.
Roger, I can't quantify the hatred I have for this movie, but I'm going to try. Okay. Because I get paid to do that. Very early on, and we saw that first scene, the dismemberment scene. That's the hook. We're supposed to now get interested. This guy's tough. We didn't need the explicit. I didn't even like the language use of this dismemberment. That's how short my fuse has become on violence when I see it in service of something that is nothing more than violence. This film is nothing more than a dozen ways to chop up a person.
However, it remains as a top-ranking cult film today. The Hitcher has a long-lasting legacy because it's not overzealous by any means. The film puts its trust in the audience by not over-explaining anything, allowing us to draw our own conclusions. Every intense moment serves its atmosphere and direct narrative. We aren't left with more questions than when we started, but it may drive speculation at the very least. Its uncompromising tone allows it to stand out from other thrillers at the time, while not being too over the top or unbelievable. And to top it off, Hauer's performance and cruelty is where the movie ultimately gets its flowers. If you want more Rutger Hauer, I recommend his under-the-radar alien ripoff flick Split Second. In conclusion, this is not just a film about a tense encounter between two people. It's about how misguided judgment has consequences, how a threat cannot be fully reasoned with, and that danger can enter our lives suddenly. And if you've ever thought about picking up a stranger, well, that's all for now. Thank you again for checking out my video. I love cult films and dissecting them, so if you've made it this far, please like, subscribe, and comment. I have more videos on the way and I'd really appreciate it.